Okay, we are continuing with the big Java concept for chapter 6 by Horstman. This is going to be our part 3, and it's going to be a folder. So we talked about the while loop already. We talked about hand tracing, and now we want to talk about the folder. So remember, we can have a counter in the while loop. So we had, and we talked about set, check, and change. So if I want to do something 10 times, I can start. So I can set it to 1. I go less than or equal 10. Again, my convention is always start with 0, go less than 10. So I always start with 0, go less than 10. And then we're going to update it. Our update is counter plus plus. So if I start with 1, I go less than or equal 10. Or if I start with 0, I go less than 10. And I keep adding 1 to it. Remember, the update, we want to do the last statement in the block. So we're doing set, check, and change. Now, we have something called for loop that does all those 3 things in one line. So it does the set, it's going to do the check and change in one line. One thing that I want you to pay attention to is these semicolons over here. So that means you have one statement here, and because it's a semicolons in here, you can potentially have more than one statement. I'm not suggesting you do that, especially if you just start writing programs, but you can put more than one thing in there. So I can check for the counter and something else in there. Then we're going to have counter plus plus. So the idea of the for loop is what? You're going to have your set, check, change in one line. So when we're going to use a for loop, we're going to be using the for loop when you have a starting point and the ending point, and you have some steps between them. So it's very concrete. Where am I starting? Where am I going? And how I'm going to be updating this. Again, we're following the same thing. We're going to be setting, checking, and changing. So some of the things that we want to talk about over here is that's going to be my set, check, and change. So that would be my initialization. I want to talk about declaring my variable over here. So if I declare my variable over here, int I, this I is going to only live inside of this for loop. That means after here, this I doesn't exist. So if I had another I before this loop, this is not going to affect that one. But on the other side of it, it's not available outside of this. Of course, I know what's going to be happening because I less than or equal 10. That means it's going to be 10 before I get here. Another thing that we want to talk about is these 3 expressions should be related to each other. So when I have I equal 5, I'm checking the I am updating the I. So we want to be sure this happens. Just like your while loop, if I have the condition over here that I am changing, and this condition is never going to change, then it's going to give me an endless loop. So we can get endless loop in the for loop, but it's going to be a lot less than while loop. Again, if you put a semicolon over here, your for loop is going to be just that one line and the rest of them. So if I put a semicolon right here, if I put a semicolon right there, what's going to happen is this for loop, I5 less than 10, I plus plus is going to run. It's going to keep running till I get to the 10. And then I'm going to come here. I'm going to do sum equals sum plus I. My sum was a 0. My I is 10. So my sum is going to give me 10 instead of doing the whole thing. So we got to be careful not to put a semicolon here. All right, so let's talk about this for loop, and we're going to go through this. So first, we're going to do the initialization, which is our set. Then we're going to check, that would be our check. And then we're going to do update. So that's going to keep going. So between the update and checking condition, we're going to keep going back and forth. All right, so the set, I'm going to set my counter to something. In this case, I'm going to set my counter to 1. Then I'm going to check my condition. So this is my set, this is my check. So if I put my counter equal 20, then it wouldn't be true. It wouldn't go through the for loop. So that counter is going to check it to be sure it's correct. Then it's going to go inside the body and it's going to print the counter. Then it's going to come out and it's going to increment or update my value, my condition, and it's going to check it again. So it's going to update, check, update, check till this condition changes, and it's going to stop the for loop. So this update that we do, it doesn't have to be plus plus. It can go the other way around. So I can start with 10 and I can check it to see if it's greater than or equal to 0, and I go minus minus. Not only I can do minus minus, I can put the whole expression over there. I can say counter equal counter plus 2 or plus equal 2. I can put a lot more things in there. I'm not suggesting to do it because it's going to make it harder to read, but I can go from 0 to less than 10 and a step every 2. So it's going to be 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. So again, the variables that are declared inside the for loop, it does not exist outside the brackets. So it's only going to be, we're only going to have this counter inside of this block of code. So if I really need this counter, I should be declaring it outside. I don't see any reason of doing it because we know the counter is going to be 10 after we're done with this for loop anyway. But if it's declared outside, then it's going to be available here. Now, the scope of it is going to change. That means this counter does exist outside the for loop. So this is an example that if I want to go through all the character of a string, remember the way that we're going to be checking for the string is the dot length. So we're going to start with I0. We're going to go less than length. So that's the convention I'm used to. So if my word has 10 characters with it, I'm going to start with 0, go less than 10, which is 9. I'm going to go 0 to 9. And then we're going to get the char at that one, that I. So I'm going to start with 0. So first I'm going to get the first one, which is 0, then 1, 2, 3. This way I am going through every character of my string. And then when my I become the length of my string, we're going to stop. So we had this in the while loop. We can use the for loop to do the same thing. So we can start with year 1, go less than or equal number of years. I can start with 0, less than number of years. What I am processing and what I'm showing to the user doesn't have to be exactly the same thing. So if I start with 0 and I go less than number of years, if I want to print the year, I have to print year plus 1. And that's why we sometimes start with 1. But if I start 1 instead of 0, then my less than becomes less than or equal to be sure we are not off by 1. So we're going through that. So we have year 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we just printing the balance in here. That's the flow chart for the for loop. So we're starting with year 1, and then we're going to check to see if year is a less than or equal number of years. If it's false, it's going to just come out of the for loop. If it's true, we're going to update the balance. We're going to add 1 to the year, and then we're going to check it again. We're going to keep doing this. That's the program in your book. You have the code for it if you purchase the book, and then you can play with it. Let's go over some of these together, and then you can do your own self-check. All right, so we have for I equals 0, I less than 5, I plus plus. What values do we get for I? We know we're going to start with 0, so the first one is going to be 0. Then we're going to add 1 to it, so it's going to be 1. 1 is less than 5. Then we're going to add 1 to it, it's going to be 2. 2 less than 5. We're going to keep going, so we're going to stop when I becomes 5. We're going to stop when I is 6, because I less than or equal 5 is also acceptable. The next one, we're going backward. So we start with 5. So the first number is 5. Then it's going to be, we're doing I minus minus, so it's going to be 4. Then it's going to be 3. Then it's going to be 2. Then it's going to be 1. Then it's going to be 0. Then it's going to be -1, and we're going to stop. What about this one? I equals 0, I less than 9, I plus 2. So the first time we're going to start with 0, then we're going to go 2, 4, 6, 8, and when we get to the 10, we're going to stop. We are adding 2 to it, and we are checking for exact match of 9. So what's going to happen is going to jump over it. So we start with 0, 2, 4, 6, 8. And we were expecting that we're going to catch it over here, but it doesn't, and it's going to jump over it. That's the reason that we try to stay away from equal, equal, or not equal in this kind of a loop conditions. So we're going to change this to be less than or in that manner. How about this one? We're starting with 1. We are looking for less than or equal to 20, and we're multiplying by 2. So the first time is 1, then it's going to be 2, then it's going to be 4, 8, 16, and 16 multiplied by 2, it is 32, and 32 is not less than 20. That's why it's going to stop. So the idea of this one is we can put some other expressions over here. It doesn't have to be plus, plus, minus, minuses. We can even put some conditions over here. So we're starting with the 0. I'm going to say while I less than str.lengths. So I'm checking for the lengths and I++. Same thing we did traversing in while loop. Okay, so these are some self-check for the for loop. Write the for loop for the investment class as a while loop. So we had a while loop for the investment. Let's take that one and change it to the for loop. How many numbers does this loop print? So we're starting with 10. We are checking to see if it's greater than or equal to 0. And minus. We need to practice on these things because we need to get hang of these when we're putting in our program. We know what's going on. So asking to write a loop, for loop that prints all even numbers. So we want even numbers. Inclusive means it's including the 20. Write a for loop that computes the sum of integers from 1 to n. How would you modify the investment runner in Java program to print the balances after 20, 40, and 100? So sometimes when we're printing stuff, it's so many of them. So we just want to get to certain numbers. So in this case, we want to print it after 20 years, after 40 years, after 100 years. All right, so I'm going to stop right here.